Have you ever heard of someone who had worked so long with solving crimes and helping that they lost their mind? No? Well, then this might be a new one, since this story is revolving around a person who came across a crime while working as a dispatcher that made him lose his mind. My name is Pedro Serene. I worked as a dispatcher in the Sheriff's Department at Monterey in the state of California for almost 11 years now. Alongside me worked San Joshua, who had also been working there for 10 years. Working with the 911 dispatch center for all these years, we had experienced all kinds of calls, from where lives were being threatened to where just a small case of an emergency where help was needed. But that night, San had no idea that the calls he would receive were going to be his last ones. I was in the middle of a call myself when I heard his screaming, and as soon as I finished my call, I rushed over to him to check what was going on, when I found him curled up in a corner. The call was still connected, so I had to disconnect it myself. He then went unconscious, and after sending him off to a hospital, I turned to check the recording of the call he had received that night. Earlier that night, around 2 a.m. when he received a call, he answered it professionally as he had been doing till now. 911, what's your emergency? Can you send some help? There was a slight pause before the voice of a female whispered in his ears. Ma'am, are you currently in danger? His tone was still relatively calm. Yes, was all she said in reply with a soft, calm voice, which was rather terrifying than it sounded. Can you tell me what kind of danger you were in? San asked while trying to maintain his professional tone. My ex, he's hunting me down, she said in a silent, calm voice. Is he in the house? After taking a hesitant pause, San asked. Yes. The calm in her voice gave him a terrible sinking feeling. We are sending a dispatch unit. Please try to remain hidden till then. He tried to assure her, but then the call disconnected all of a sudden. A team of officers was still sent to the location from where the call had been made. They reached within a time frame of 15 to 20 minutes, and as they stepped into the house, it was the state of chaos as almost all the things in the house were found broken. But no one else was found in the house. It seemed that the girl had somehow escaped, and the man must have chased after her. After searching the area for some time, the police didn't find anything. They went back to work. San told me about the girl, and it was not only him, but I was also disturbed about the whereabouts of the girl. About an hour later to the girl's call, San received another call which he received just like before. 911, what's your emergency? I think I stabbed my wife, he said in a spine-chilling, calm voice. You stabbed your wife? San asked, trying to remain his composure. Yes, I'm in the cemetery, he replied. But there was no regret or remorse in his wife. Is she bleeding heavily? Hold on, we are dispatching an ambulance on your way, sir. He started to sound disturbed by what he was hearing, but the response was rather haunting. Yes, she is. No, I think she is already gone, he said while laughing like an emotionless psychopath, which alarmed San. What do you mean she is gone? Is she dead? He asked, and this time he could not mask the panic in his voice. Yes, dude, I'm standing near her head, and no matter how many times I kick her, she just won't respond. He again laughed at the end of his sentence. A team of officers was immediately dispatched to his location, while Sam tried to remain calm during the call. His tone was rivaling even the most chilling portrayals of murderous psychopaths that are shown in movies. Can you check her pulse and breathing for me? He asked him, regaining some of his professionalism, while hoping he would still have some remorse left after what he had done. Yeah, I checked. She's gone. He again laughed like a maniac loudly after ending his sentence. Why did you stab her? San began to ask him the question he shouldn't have. She broke up with me to sleep with another man. So I went to her house and broke every damn thing while the wench tried to hide from me. But then I found her. She escaped to the cemetery. It was hard finding her and then stabbing her 21 times. He goes on to explain to San how he stabbed her each time while she struggled to get away and begged for her life, still laughing monstrously as if he was proud of what he had done. I could hear San's heavy breathing in a state of panic in the recording as the man was confessing a horrendous crime to him. Then all of a sudden, San started to get a panic attack and began screaming. Police had already reached the location by the time he had started screaming, and they found the girl's body in a horrible state to even look at. The man, who identified himself as Paul, was sitting next to the body while grinning his teeth as he stared at her. His shoes were soaked with the girl's blood and clumps of flesh, proving the fact that he had indeed kicked multiple times. He was immediately arrested on the spot. The girl was later identified as Brittany, and she was the same girl who called 911 earlier that night asking for help. The man confessed all of his crimes in a manner that sounded like he was feeling proud in doing so, and had no shred of remorse in his voice or actions. San was unconscious for 2 days straight, and when he did regain consciousness, he started screaming and panicking. He had experienced equally horrifying calls in the past than this one, but this one call was something that made him lose his mind as he could not handle the trauma. Even after getting discharged from the hospital and resigning from his position, San often suffered from panic attacks, but he's currently seeking medical help. I'm still working out my position in hopes of providing necessary help to the people who need it, and to prevent cases like Brittany's. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I'm not gonna ride in a stranger's car. God knows what kind of creep they turn out to be. My wife Martha said, when I told her that we had no other option but to hitchhike. We were coming back from a friend's marriage when our car broke down, and we were trying to find a mechanic for the past couple hours, but we were unable to do so. No matter what kind of creep they are, I don't think they'll do something to us. Besides, I'm here to protect you, I said while laughing. In response, she gave me a deep stare and told me if anything were to go wrong with it, it would be on me. Of course, being a husband comes with a package of always taking responsibility, no matter what it is. So I nodded my head yes, and she pulled out her thumb, hoping to stop a passing car. After about 3 or 4 vehicles, a car finally stopped, and a boy in his late 20s was driving it. We told him that our car had broken down, but we needed a ride, and he agreed to let us in. He told us that he was going in a different direction, but he still would love to help us and dropped us off at our destination first. I could not believe that he was this nice, or that he was just acting and had an ulterior motive. As he was silently driving, I kept thinking about what his motive could be behind being this nice. Was he thinking of abducting us and selling our organs in some illegal human trafficking market? No, he would not be able to do that. First of all, he was too young and there was 2 of us. We would simply outnumber him. So what else? Was he after my wife? Is he planning on doing something with her? Knowing my wife, there's a possibility that she would choose a young guy to have sex with over me, especially since she was way too good looking and young for an old man like me. As this thought crossed my mind, I could not think of any other possibility. I started noticing every little thing. When my wife asked him some questions related to where he lived and what he did, and when he replied with a smile on his face, pissed me off. How were they planning on doing this behind my back? Or were they not trying to hide it from me? And going to do it in front of my eyes? My wild, weird thoughts were only making it worse. There was no way she would ever do it with someone. Not someone else. I mean, she loved me, and she was not that kind of a person. As I was thinking that, he complimented my wife, and I just lost it. Hey, can you stop the car for a second? We were near the woods when I asked him this. He stopped the car, and I asked him if he wanted to come with me to take a piss, which he immediately agreed to. He was either way too trusting with strangers or a fool for a young guy. That's what I thought as he was coming with me to the woods. I asked him to do his business at a distance from me, and he was going at it. I grabbed the log and hit him on his head. He stumbled and turned his head towards me, giving a confused and shocked look, which made me even angrier, so I hit him on his head again. He fell and started bleeding through his ears. He slowly crawled backwards, asking me what did he do wrong and why was I doing this. Did he take me as a fool or something? He dared to look at my wife with ulterior motives while acting all nice, and now he's thinking the same act would make me let him go? There is no way. I hit on his crawling leg multiple times while I heard the cracking sound of his bone breaking, and then I did the same thing with his other leg, and then his hands one by one. He passed out in the process, and I started hitting on his head. I don't know how many hits I made until his skull cracked open, but I still kept hitting him even though I knew he'd died. 10 minutes after I was done with him, I realized what I'd done and started panicking. I ran towards the car where my wife was, and when she looked at me covered in blood, she understood what was going on. She told me to stop panicking and asked me to lead her to the corpse. I followed her command. My wife asked me to give her my lighter, which I always carried on me because I was a smoker, and then she somehow managed to light the boy's dead body on fire. We waited there for more than 2 hours to make sure that the body was burned enough so that no one else would be able to recognize what had happened to him. She was silent the entire time, which was making my heart sink. After covering up the crime completely, she asked me to follow her. We went to the boy's car, and she sat in the driving seat and started the car. I was scared because I knew that she was pissed off and was not going to forgive me easily for this. "I'm sorry, honey. I thought he was going to trap you into having sex with him." I broke the silence as she was driving without speaking a word. She kept quiet and did not reply, which made me feel even guiltier. I started begging for her forgiveness, and after an hour of silence, she finally looked at me with tears in her eyes, which made my heart break, and she said, "How can you do this every time? I love you so much that I'm ready to go at any length for you. So why is it that you do not trust me or my love for you?"
Have you ever jumped from the roof of a 2-story building? It hurts, especially when you're unable to pull off a proper landing. I had to do this once in order to save my own life. Let me take you back to when I was 18 and 19 years old. I'm 26 now. My boyfriend at the time was extremely abusive, but being scared, naive, and believing that he loved me and would change, I stayed with him. We had several problems. We abused substances together, which was one of the reasons why I believed we really loved each other. Just the drugs were making us act a way we never had before towards each other. We had trust issues, we were desperately codependent, were on and off constantly, and he had a problem with not being able to keep his hands to himself in his fits of rage. I was very depressed. My family and friends didn't want anything to do with me for obvious reasons, but he made it seem like I couldn't have friends anyway or even talk to anyone without his knowledge. He would check my phone when I slept. He would interrogate me. When I had a job, I worked in a place that had horrible phone reception. If I didn't return his text fast enough, or if the text didn't add up because of the reception and the fact that he wouldn't receive my text in order, he accused me of texting someone else I was cheating on him with and would threaten me. He would insult me, tell me he knew I would never leave him because I wouldn't be able to get anyone better than him. He called me stupid, ugly, all sorts of terrible names. I never even cheated on him. He would lie to me about sleeping with other women just to hurt me and see me cry. Then he would physically abuse me, slap, choke to the point that I thought he was going to knock me out or worse. The worst one of all, however, was this one time we were hanging out at a park, partaking in things we probably shouldn't have in public. I won't go into too much detail because I'm afraid of him seeing this, and I've been scared for years that he would find me. I literally have nightmares about him finding out where I live and showing up at my house. I wake up drenched in sweat, and I'm actually sweating typing this right now. So we're at the park, and for some reason to this day I still can't fathom why, he starts hurting himself right in front of me. I freak out and tell him I'm going to call an ambulance for his own safety, and he just takes off running. About 10 minutes later, a police car and paramedic shows up, and he's nowhere to be found. I told them the general direction he ran in and apologized for wasting their time. Maybe about 20 minutes later, he calls me. I answer, and he's just screaming at me. "Why would you call the cops on me?" I apologized profusely, trying to explain through my tears that I was deeply concerned for his safety and that I hadn't actually called the police, that I had called an ambulance and didn't know the police would also show up. I'm crying, begging him to tell me where he is. He says he's on the roof of a building and gives me cross streets to his location. I stupidly meet up with him. I climb up the building onto the roof. The sun has gone down and it's dark at this point. We just start talking and he's acting like everything is normal. I can't remember what we're actually talking about, but I remember thinking how nice it was to actually just have a conversation with him without yelling insults or accusations. Then, all of a sudden, he pounces on me. I'm on my back and his knees are digging into my shoulders, holding my arms down. His eyes look crazy and soulless. Then he starts slapping me in the face. I later find out that one particular slap was so hard he gave me a black eye. He's screaming at me. I can't remember what all he said, but I know he was calling me names, accusing me of things I never did. Then he starts punching my legs and telling me that he's gonna have his way with me. My back is hurting from the stucco roof and it's bleeding through my shirt. I think he choked me too, but I can't remember. I seriously thought that I was about to die. Then I had finally went into survival mode. I'm sobbing and pleading with him. If you really love me, why are you doing this? I never even did anything to you. If you truly love me, you'll just stop. Please. As soon as I say this, it's like flipping a switch. His eyes and demeanor change, and he gets off of me. He starts apologizing, and as soon as he turns his back, I jump off the roof. I landed horribly, and I hear him from the rooftop yelling. At this time, I'm thinking I broke my back and feet, and I'm lying in a crumpled heap in an alleyway. I hear him coming down, and I'm thinking how I need to get to the street and scream for help. He's getting closer, trying to help me up, and while dragging myself army style to the road, I scream as loud as I can for him to not touch me. You just tried to kill me. I see a man on the sidewalk across the street. I yell to him to please help and call the police. I'm guessing he did. I think I kind of blacked out at this point. But I remember seeing my ex run off with my purse in his hands. I went to the hospital and the police caught him a couple of hours later, and from what I heard, he put up a pretty good fight with them. It's been so long now that this story feels like a bad dream. I can't believe this actually happened, but I am grateful I survived. Needless to say, I've been clean for several years. I have my family, friends, and life back. I am married now to a wonderful man who would never even think of hurting me. We have a couple of children, and I love my life. To anyone out there in an abusive relationship, please, get out while you can. Nothing is worth risking your life every day with a lunatic, and there is someone out there who will love you and not take you for granted. You're worth so much more. Back in the spring of 2018, I was living in a cramped Brooklyn apartment with my best friend in the entire world. We'd each moved to New York City around the same time, two country girls feeling way out of our depth in the big city, and struck up an instant connection once we'd heard each other's accents in a coffee shop. She'd grown up in Kentucky while I was literally just over the state line in West Virginia, and we'd each had a very similar rural upbringing. On top of that, we had a similar sense of humor, similar tastes, and we just clicked. Yet there was one major difference between us. Kayla had been sad to leave her little town behind. She'd been sad to leave her family, sad to leave her friends. The Big Apple was calling her all right, but she still pined for home. But for me, I didn't miss home one bit, and my family is about as messed up as they come. But it's not really their fault. I guess they're responsible for their actions and all, but we suffered a family tragedy when I was a kid, and it really took its toll. Either way, meeting her was an absolute blessing. But as much as we enjoyed each other's company, we started pining for some more masculine company, if you catch my drift. And since talking to strangers in NYC is the fastest way to end up bound and gagged in someone's basement, we decided to try dating apps on for size. Honestly, I found Tinder and Hinge to be a little overwhelming, but my roommate had much more luck with an app called Bumble. Basically, the premise is that the girls talk first, giving them much more control over their interactions with the guys they match with. So, it was little surprise that she landed a very promising-looking guy before I did. He was handsome, well-read, and he was also from the South, but he'd said he'd moved around an awful lot during his childhood, so he didn't consider himself from any one particular place. All in all, he sounded like a nice guy, and after a few dates, my roommate brought him back to our apartment on the night that I happened to be awake. I was excited to meet him, but even more excited for my roommate to start spending nights at his place too, since I got the whole apartment to myself. And in New York City, solitude is a luxury that very few get to enjoy. Anyway, so it's Friday night. I'm sitting on the couch watching Netflix and demolishing some Pepperidge Farm when I hear my roommate's key in the door. In she walks with her date in tow. We make some introductions and a casual but friendly conversation begins. Only the more we talk, the more I realize there's something oddly familiar about my roommate's Bumble date. And unfortunately, this is where my story needs to take a little tangent. See, my 10-year-old brother was murdered, and his killer was someone our whole family knew. I was just 6 years old when Mom and Dad took me over to stay with my grandpa. They told me it would just be one night, and 3 days later, they finally showed up again to tell me that Ryan wouldn't be coming home, and that he'd have gone to live in heaven with Grandma. I'd already suffered through the loss of my grandmother, but at that age, I think death was still a very abstract concept to me. I didn't grasp the permanence of it, or even what it really meant. It sucked that I couldn't see Gam Gam anymore, but at the same time, it just felt like she and Ryan were in the next room over. Not gone, just not visible. I was sad about it, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it really affected me until much later on, when I actually learned about the circumstances surrounding Ryan's death. I don't remember exactly when I learned about it, but I know it made me really angry and sad to think that the reason I couldn't see Ryan anymore was because someone had hurt him. It made it even worse that the person that had hurt him was supposed to be one of his friends. The little tidbit was like the salt in the wound. Like I knew the kid. I'd seen him and my brother hanging out on a number of different occasions. So when somebody mentioned that it was Troy Arnold that had killed Ryan, I became fixated on him, wondering how such a gangly mess of stick-thin limbs and scruffy dark hair could be capable of causing my family such pain. I remember his eyes too, how they were so dark brown that they looked more inky black than anything else. And it was those eyes that featured heavily in the nightmares for a long time. But not until I actually found out how and why he'd killed my brother. According to Troy's confession, he and Ryan had been out playing by some train tracks one afternoon. Troy had found an old railroad fish plate, obviously tossed on the side of the tracks by some careless engineer. The thing must have weighed about 22 pounds, but all Troy said was that it felt really heavy in his hand. He and Ryan then walked down the train tracks a little ways until Ryan stopped to tie his laces. Troy said he just stared at the top of Ryan's head for a second and started to wonder what it would sound like if he hit him with the fish plate. So, he hit him, and Ryan started shaking something awful. Troy knew he'd be in trouble for what he'd done, so he decided to try and hide it. He bashed Ryan's head with the iron fish plate until he stopped moving. Now look, I've had time to think it over, and I do actually understand why I did the first part. Kids are dumb, cruel, and thoughtless, so it makes sense he'd take the coward's route in that respect. But what I don't understand is what he did next. When confronted by the cops, Troy said that all the other wounds on Ryan's body were the result of him being dragged to the shallow grave that he dug for him. Ryan was dragged for no more than 100 yards, but somehow, during the course of that short journey, his dead body sustained some of the following damage. It appeared an attempt had been made to cut Ryan's tongue out. Both of his eyes were missing from their sockets. Fingers were missing, as they'd been ripped off at the joint. More than one piece of debris had been inserted into Ryan's rectal cavity. There was catastrophic damage done to his private areas, as if they'd been repeatedly smashed in an attempt to pulverize them. And some of the info didn't trickle down to me in a clinical fashion. No. All I heard were rumors, some of which weren't all that far off from the truth. In the end, Troy Arnold was sent away to juvie in some other state, and since he was so young when he killed my brother, the federal government gave him a brand new identity at age 18, so he could go out into the world as quite literally a different person. The nightmares continued for years after, and the more I knew regarding Ryan's death, the more intense they got. It got to the point where I kept dreaming that Troy Arnold would come for me too. He'd gotten one sibling, now it was time to get the other. Since the only thing I really remembered about Troy was how black his eyes were and how scruffy his hair was, those became the central features of this monster my mind had created, until there came a time when the nightmares would simply be of some tuft of dark hair with glistening eyes staring out from it. Which brings me back to my chance meeting with my roommate's Bumble date. Because as good looking as he was, something about the color of his eyes and the way he carried himself, it brought me back some seriously horrible memories. Not that I said anything, of course, not at first anyway, but the longer we talked, the more I started to piece together who exactly we were talking to. He was reluctant to talk about family, and any attempt to pin down something about his formative years was quite succinctly evaded. When he mentioned something traumatic happening during his youth, I almost snapped. But then I started to get this weird, crushing feeling in my gut, something I couldn't quite pin down until one horrible moment of realization. It happened the moment I mentioned growing up in West Virginia. The Bumble date guy shot me this look, this distinctly guilty look, and what had once been a friendly conversation turned into an impromptu staring competition. My roommate was like, "What's going on?" But her question was accompanied by an awkward giggle. She could obviously pick up the tension. She just didn't know why it was so thick in the air all of a sudden. "Troy?" I remember asking. The word just sort of left my mouth before I could think about the implications, like the whole thing was a completely involuntary act. Jesus Christ. The way he looked at me afterward with those black-brown irises that seemed to take up his entire eye. It was him. My brother's murderer was sitting right in front of me. My nightmares had come to visit. "I should go," he said, as he began to walk out, and the words just wouldn't come to me. I sat there dumbfounded while my roommate was all like, "Hey, whoa, what just happened here? Your name isn't Troy? Who's Troy? Where are you going? What just happened?" I managed to catch him right before he walked out the door, and all I could bring myself to say was like, "Don't come back." What followed was a complete reliving of something I tried so hard to get over. Obviously, I had to tell my roommate everything, and I mean everything, so she could actually understand A, what had just happened, and B, why I'd had such a strong reaction to it. The thing that got at me first was the sheer improbability of it. Of all the apartments in all the cities in all the world, it seemed like a cosmic joke directed right at me, one designed by a cruel universe to undo all the progress I'd made. But my roommate helped me rationalize it. I mean, New York City is the place to go if you want to be anonymous, right? Of all the places where a person could just blend into a crowd, NYC had to top the list. She was a real help, and support she showed during the fallout from the chance encounter, it only further solidified what an incredible friendship we had, and still have to this day. And if there's one takeaway from the whole online dating thing to be taken from this, is that you never know who you're talking to. They could give you some story about how they're the second coming of Christ, but it's all just a ruse, all just an attempt to scrub the blood from their hands. Blood that will always be there, no matter how much they try to be rid of it.